So in this lesson, we want to create our validator code. So the first thing I want to do is to create a new package, and that package will be called validator. And the only thing I want to import right now is the regex package. Okay. Now I am importing the regex package because I want to do two validations using regex. That will be checking the email and checking the phone number that is provided by the client. So let me create two variables with our regex. So I have them here. One is called email rx, the other one is called phone rx. Okay. So if you have gone through my previous series on introduction to web development with Go, you would have seen me use this this regex. Okay, it's a very standard regex for verifying an email. Now this other one for phone regex, I created this one whereby we simply provide, or we are expecting a phone number that has a country code, 3 digits. It has another 3 digits followed by 4 more digits. Okay, so let's create a map that will contain our validation errors. Again, this is something we did in the previous series. So if you need a reminder on that, then go back and watch that series. So what we're going to do, we will create a type that wraps our validation errors map. Okay. Previously, we used the map directly, but now we will add a layer of abstraction. So we have a type validator. Okay, and this type has our errors map embedded in it. It's a map, key string, and the value is also string. Okay, so what I want to do now is to create methods and functions on this validator type. So the first thing we need to do is to be able to create a new instance of this validator type. Okay, keep in mind all we're doing is initializing the map. Okay, so I'm going to call that function new, and what it does, it creates a new validator instance. Okay, so very straightforward function. All I'm going to do is to name it new. Okay, it doesn't take any arguments, and what it does return is a pointer to a validator, since we want that one validator. Okay, and so I'm going to return an instance of validator. Okay, and all I need to provide is a map. Okay, and so I'm going to initialize that map. I'm going to say map string and string. Okay, so we have an empty map. And so this will be how we create our validator. So now we can proceed with using this map. Okay, so what else can we ask of this map, of this errors map? We can check to see if there are any entries in the error map. Okay, and so let's create a a method, okay, called valid. And notice we're creating a method because we want access, we want to be able to have access to the validator type. Okay, so valid is a method on the validator type. Okay, so valid checks the errors map for entries. Okay, and so I create a function which is a method on validator. Okay, notice I'm using a pointer. Okay, valid. Okay, and what we want to ask is, does the errors map have entries or not? So that's a true or false response. So we will return a bool, and so we'll simply say return the length of v dot errors if it's equal to 0. Okay, so if there are entries, this will be false, and if there are no entries, then this will return true. Alright, so that's a rather straightforward method. Another thing we can ask is if a particular entry is in the errors map. So we can create an in function. Okay. So, well, let me take that back. I can check to see if an element is in some other list that is provided. Okay. So I'm going to create a method called a function called in, and what in does, it checks if an element can be found in a provided list of elements. Okay, so you can think of this as a utility function that will come in handy when we are writing our validation code. Okay, so I will have an element, well, element of type string, and I will have another list which will be a list of entries. Okay, and so I will simply ask this function to tell me, can I find element in the list? And that's straightforward enough. I'll just use a loop. So for I colon range list, what I want to do is to check if element is list I. Okay, so if list I is actual element, meaning it is the item, then I will simply return true. If we finish the loop and don't find anything, then obviously we will return false. Okay, so this is one of our utility functions that we will be using later on when we write our validation code. Okay, so another utility function that we need to create is checking if a regex string meaning let's say the phone number, if it matches, okay, my regex pattern. And so I'm going to create a method called match, not a method but a function called matches, and it returns true if a string, in our case, if a phone number or a website, which will be a string, if it matches, right? So matches returns true if a string value matches a specific regex pattern. Okay, so how we're going to do with this function, again, it's a function, not a method. We will provide the string. Right? In our case, it will either be the phone number or the website address, and then we will provide the regex that we want to use to compare the passed in value. Okay? And if they are valid, if it's a valid phone number or whatever, then we'll return true. So let's return our x dot match string, okay, and we'll simply pass in value. Okay, so if it's valid, then we will matches will return true. If not, it will return false. Okay, so I need to specify bool. Okay, great. So that's another of our utility functions. Okay, and you'll see these being used later on. Now another utility function that we want to use is to check if our website. Okay, so let me back up a bit. Matches we're going to use for email and phone number. Okay. Now let's look at checking for a valid website. And so that's another utility function, and I'm going to call that valid website. Okay. So valid website checks if a website, or if a string value is a valid web URL. Right? So let's implement that. And what we're going to give to this function is a string. And let's call that website. And it will return whether it is a valid URL or not. And so to do that, we're going to simply use the parse request URI function that Go has. So we don't need to write anything complex. We're just going to use what Go has provided to us. So it's URL that parse request URI. And all we need to provide is the string, okay, and it will tell us whether it is a valid URL or not. And thinking about it, we don't even need this because I'm not going to use the URL, so I'm going to put the underscore. All I care about is error. So I could say if error not equal to nil, then return false. else return true. Okay, but that seems like a lot of code, so I'll just replace it with something more simple. Return error is nil. Okay, so if error is nil, we know that it's a valid URL, but if error is not nil, then it will return false, which means it's an invalid URL. So much easier, much more simple. Right, so these are our utility functions that will help us implement our validation. Okay, so let's actually talk about something, I guess, more important, and that is how do we add an entry to our errors map. Okay, and so I'm going to do that. I'm going to have add error will be our method that adds an error entry to the errors map. Okay, now this is a method, and it's a method because we need access to the errors map. Okay, so v validator add error, and we must provide the key, which is of type string, and we must provide the message or the value we want written. Okay. Well, these are two strings, so let me just remove one of them. So key, comma, message, type string. Okay, instead of having to type string 2 times. Okay, so how would I do this? Well, first of all, I need to make sure that the entry is not, there's no key in the map already. That's straightforward. So let's just say if let's say exists, okay, v.errors. Okay, so that's my condition. So I'm gonna check if v.errors contains a specific key. All right. Now, if the key is already in there, then I don't want to do anything. All right. However, if the key is not in there, then I want to put the key and the value in there. So that's my condition. I want to do this first. Okay, so I want to execute this code first. Okay, and then of course exists will be true or false. All right, and then I'm going to check. All right, if it's false, then I know I can add it into the map. So that's straightforward. v.errors is key will be the associated message. All right. Okay, so that's how we add an entry into our errors map. Check if the key is there. If it's there, we don't do anything. But if it's not there, then we add it. Okay. Let's look at how do we perform the actual validation check. Okay. So what I want to do is to have a method that actually performs the validation check to see if the entry is actually valid. And if the entry is not valid, then I want my method to call add error, to add an entry into the map. Okay, so I'm going to create a method called check. Okay, and so check performs the validation checks, okay, and calls the add error method excuse me, method in turn if an error entry needs to be added. Okay, so we're gonna have this method, okay, and what this method will do is accept, okay, whether the validation failed or not. So true or false. True means that it's okay, it's valid. False means that whatever the client passed in is not valid. So we'll have a key, and of course we'll have a message, and these will be passed to our add error method if we have a false okay. Okay, so let's see how this works. Okay. I'm going to say if not okay, meaning if false, then I know that there was a failure. And if there's a failure, I'm going to simply call the add error and pass it the key and pass it the message. Again, I could have written the add error functionality inside the check functionality, but in this case it's nice to just be able to call that method, and so we have one line of code which is rather clear and easy to maintain. All right, now there's one more thing we need to do. We have another utility function that I need to include, and it's going to be called unique, and all it does is to make sure that the entries in the mode, right, so if you recall, entries in the mode, okay, we want to make sure that whatever is placed in the list, there are no repeats. Okay, so we want to run a check just to make sure that the client did not pass in two or more of the same thing. All right, so unique checks that there are no repeating values in the slice. Okay, so unique, again, is a function, not a method, and all I'm going to do is to pass in the slice, okay, and then I'm going to simply return true or false. Now, how do I check to see if the entries in a list, in a slice, they're unique? Well, I'm just going to use this approach whereby I'm going to create a map and I'm going to place the entries into the map. So let's call it unique values. And the reason why I do that is because I know that if there's a repeat value, then the key will be overwritten by the new entry. And so if I keep doing that, I'll find out that my map will be shorter than my list. Okay. All right. So I create my let's call it. Let it just have bool as the value. All right. So I have a map, and so what I'm going to do, I'm going to iterate over my list. Okay, and I'm going to take the value And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to take that value and I'm going to place that inside a map, and I'm going to just assign true. Okay, and I'm just going to do that for every item in the slice. Now what happens is, for example, if I have hello hello, then when I place hello into the map, well, the key is hello, the value is true. And when I see the next hello, well, I'm just going to replace that previous hello with the new hello with a value of true. So what happens? Well, if I were to check the length of my map, I would find out that it has a different length than the actual slice, because the slice would have had two hellos, but the map simply has one hello because similar values are simply overwritten. All right, and that's why we do it this way. So all I'm doing is, oh, okay, I'm supposed to make value. Okay, values. Yeah. So I'm going to check the length of the slice that was passed in, and I'm going to compare it with the length of the map. Okay, how many entries? And if they are different, then it means that there must have been repeating values in the slice. Okay, that takes care of our utility functions and methods that we will need to operate with our validator code. Now notice that we need the net/URL package to be able to use the parse request URI functionality. Alright, so let's save that and let's leave the lesson here. In the next lesson, we're going to actually continue and see how we will set up to be able to handle validation. I'll see you in that next lesson.